Hi, this is all about invisible landscapes and my 2 trips to Iceland, which is on display just now at Discovery Point. A good place to start is the actual title itself. Invisible landscapes got quite a lot of resonances and quite a lot of meaning. In the most obvious sense, all my work is really to do with landscapes. I'm really interested in taking pictures of nature and being in the landscape and engaging with the landscape. And this work very much reflects that sort of idea. So the landscape part is actually fairly straightforward, particularly when you think about the highlands of Iceland, which is possibly one of the most spectacular landscapes in the world. The invisible part is maybe not so obvious, but the invisible part of it comes from 2 different directions. Invisible in the sense that some of these pictures were taken with a drone, so they're not visible to an ordinary viewpoint. And most of the pictures were actually taken with an infra-red camera, which shows you parts of the light spectrum that isn't actually visible to the naked eye. That could get a bit technical and a bit scientific, so I'll try not to go into that in too much detail. But if you take this first photograph here, which is a kind of signature photograph of the Thorsmork Valley, which is one of my favourite places in Iceland, that was taken with a drone. And the drone at that point was fairly high above the landscape. And it's really quite a dramatic panorama that you get from that. It's also quite spectacular with the naked eye, but going above it with the drone gives you an overview of the rivers, the mountains, and the glaciers in the distance. And what's particularly resonant about that picture is the fact that that was the beginning of one of the trails that we actually went on. So as well as the viewer and the camera seeing this huge panorama, we as hikers were looking at where we were going to go. With a certain amount of trepidation, I have to say, because you can actually see the glaciers and you get an impression of the weather there, so it's already quite spectacular. This is actually halfway through 2 separate trails. And the first trail that we went on was one called the Logavagar Trail, which that took us 3 days to do. And that trail ends at Thorsmork, the valley that you're looking at just now. And the second trail that we went on is something called the Fimmvörðuháls Trail. And that should take 2 days to do, but we were really stupid and did it in 1 day with inevitable consequences of exhaustion and all the rest of it. And the 2 trails, one trail ends at Thorsmork, the other trail begins at Thorsmork. So Thorsmork is central to the whole kind of experience. An idea of journey is totally central as well to all of this. And one of the things that I tried to do, as well as take photographs, was to write quite a lot about these trails as well. And I became obsessed with Iceland landscape, and that becomes clear if you see the exhibition. And there's a lot of writing in the exhibition. I mean, I kept diary entries, I wrote poetry, and so forth. And one of the early pieces in the exhibition is actually just a listing of names of the different places on the Logavagar Trail. And what I actually found was, I think that the Icelandic language itself, though pretty difficult to get your tongue around, is actually very, very evocative. And what this was almost like was a found poem. So it became possible just to actually write down the names of the different places on that trail. And it was almost like a poem in itself. So that was really quite, the whole idea of language, myth, tale, story, poem was central to the whole experience as well. In terms of my feelings about landscape, what I tried to do with these photographs was not just to record what the Ice landscape is like, but to try and convey some sort of impression about how I felt when I was there. And that kind of influenced the whole idea of bringing in an infrared camera with me. From a practical point of view, because we were hiking for 4 days on one trail and hiking the rest of it over a day, which should have been 2 days. We had to carry all of our equipment, so that meant all the food, all the clothing that we needed had to be stuck in a rucksack, taken with you, and we slept in mountain huts. It meant that I had to be extremely kind of judicious about how much photographic equipment I took, and that came down to something quite minimal, in the sense that I took one camera and one lens, and the camera was an infrared converted camera, converted to black and white infrared. Because I decided that I was going to be working in black and white the whole time, I wanted to get something that would really kind of enhance that monochrome aspect. And you can see in these kind of photographs that it's a strange, almost lunar kind of landscape that you have in Iceland. And what black and white infrared does, it kind of enhances that, and if anything, it exaggerates it slightly, so that the depth of tone that infrared gives you and the kind of depth of contrast is something that only really, to me, comes from infrared. It's not a kind of crude infrared that is really kind of obviously infrared. And one of the nicest things that I find anybody can say about your infrared photography is, oh, I didn't realise that was infrared. And that means that I've taken a good photograph that I'm very pleased with. So that influenced the decision to take infrared photography. And I didn't take any filters with me, I didn't take any tripod. I took one lens and one camera. Initially, through considerations of practicalities and weight, but eventually for aesthetic reasons. So I think there's a kind of unity that goes through all the work that's in the exhibition because of that. Also, I've seen a lot of really great photography of Iceland in colour that is very competent, very tasteful, but it bores me stiff because I've seen it all before, and it's almost like kind of tourist board type stuff. So I wanted to get away from that and come away with something that's a bit austere. Interestingly enough, I can't remember who said it, but there was a photographer who said that every photograph is a self-portrait. So I really don't know what this is saying about me, if you look at the kind of gloominess and austerity of these photographs. But one of the points about this really is that if you were to go to Iceland and you were to go to these places, they wouldn't exactly look like this, because what I've tried to do, I've tried to express the emotions that I felt when I was there. So what I hope comes out of this photography is feelings of awe, at times almost feelings of fear, feelings of wonder, because one of the most memorable moments was the night before we were coming out to do the Fimmvörðuháls trail, which can be quite intimidating in terms of weather. The warden in one of the huts said to us, so you go to the Fimmvörðuháls tomorrow, have you checked the weather forecast? Do you have a GPS? Are you experienced hikers? You wouldn't want to get lost up there, because the area between the two glaciers has its own weather system, which didn't exactly relax us very much. But as it happened, there was quite a lot of mist and fog on the top, so I wasn't able to take any photographs of that part at all. But it turned out fairly well. The weather was reasonably kept, I suppose. So, in terms of black and white, I've said a little bit about that. But the things that, to me, that work with black and white, form, texture, and tone. Now, to me, that's all I need from photography. Some folk have remarked that I don't really have a sense of colour, which is fair enough, because colour isn't really a thing that particularly interests me. So yeah, it's all about form, it's all about tone, it's all about texture, and I think black and white really gives you that, and I think that comes out from these photographs. One of the things as well about the writing in the exhibition is that, like I said, I became kind of obsessed with Iceland. I read books about Iceland, I looked at photographs about Iceland. In fact, my absolute all-time hero photographer is a guy called Ragnar Axelsson, who takes wonderful photographs of Highland Iceland himself, and he's influenced this stuff quite a lot. But what actually happened was that I got an idea before I even went to Iceland about what it'd be like. And I dreamed, this sounds crazy, but I dreamed about Iceland. I read about Iceland, and by the time I actually got to Iceland, I had constructed a landscape of Iceland in my own mind. And when that came together with the real landscape of Iceland, it was like a mixture of imagination, it was like a mixture of dream, it was like a mixture of fiction. So to me, the landscape of Iceland became a kind of construction. It wasn't just an objective, real thing that was out there. And what I was doing when I was out there, I suppose, this could get a little bit kind of arty, but I was kind of projecting my own idea of the Iceland landscape onto the landscape. So that's getting back to this whole idea about these being some kind of a self-portrait in an interesting kind of way. I was speaking here about how the landscape is something you actually construct as well as something that is actually objectively out there. And one of the poems that I wrote for the exhibition, this one, What is a Landscape Made of? And that was trying to work through these kind of ideas as a kind of meditation about the real Icelandic landscape and the imagined landscape. So these pieces actually became quite important to me because it wasn't just about the visual side of things, it was about the kind of meditative side of things as well. And what this poem is really about was on the left-hand side, you've got a list of geological terms like magma, precipitation, weather, basalt, and so on. And on the right-hand side, you've got things that are just as important in terms of landscape, like imagination, memory, perception, and consciousness. And it's really when these two things come together, like an objective view of the landscape and a kind of subjective, personal view of the landscape, that's when the landscape is actually a kind of construction. So that's really quite an important part of what I was thinking. One of the things that I tried to do here as well, which is quite evident in the captions, was rather than just give a totally factual, this photograph was taken at a particular place at a particular time and whatnot, some of the captions have extended pieces of writing beside them, and some of them are very brief because they're just like actually haiku poems. So that was an idea to try and be a bit more creative with a kind of contextualization in the photographs. This was a particularly interesting one from a personal point of view, because the heading here is 3 a.m. and Murda's Local. Now in summer in Iceland, it really doesn't get dark, and that was good if you were on a hike for a long day, because you could technically hike overnight if you really wanted to. But this particular night, the mountain hut in which we were staying was getting quite crowded, and I wasn't going to be particularly comfortable sharing the hut with all these people. And COVID was around at the time as well, and we'll be come back to that, right? So I had checked with the warden, was it going to be okay, could I sleep outside? Because I had a sleeping bag that was good to about 5 degrees below zero, and the weather forecast was actually quite good that night. So he says that's okay, you can sleep outside. So what actually happened was that 3 o'clock in the morning I woke up, forgot where I was, got out of my sleeping bag, stunned, looked over at this landscape. I mean, what a view. This was 3 a.m. looking over towards the glacier of Murda's Local. So that was actually an absolutely fabulous moment, almost disorientating and dreamlike, where I'm, just momentarily forgot where I was. So that was really quite an incredible moment. I was talking about a kind of otherworldly, lunar type of feeling you get from Iceland. And one of the things about the Logavegr trail that we were on, you went through snow fields, you went through lava fields. Some people say it's like the Icelandic landscape in microcosm. And this part here, this is an extinct volcano called Hatfell, and that is really like an alien landscape, because what you're walking through here is a black basalt desert. And it was actually quite warm when we were walking through there, having walked through snowfields on the day before. So that aspect of things is really quite incredible. This was an incredible mountain I won't even try to pronounce it, but it translates as the rhino's horn, and you can see a part here which is like the horn of a rhinoceros. And I would draw your attention to this one because this is where the infra-red feature is most prominent, because what infra-red does is it reflects chlorophyll in vegetation, and that's why this stuff looks snowy. But in real life that would be green. I try to avoid doing too much of that kind of slightly exaggerated infrared effect. That's as far as I wanted to go with it. But that's why that vegetation appears white. That's an effect of the infrared camera. The exhibition opened a couple of weeks ago now, and it was an amazing opening evening because we were very honoured to have Christine Hannesdottir, who's the honorary consul of the Icelandic embassy, who actually opened the show. And we had a host of people who came around, and Danny Cullen of Law Brewing had brewed some beer. John and Stuart from Menes had supplied wine. Rory Lovey of the Bridgeview Restaurant supplied canapes. So it was a wonderful evening that we had. And Adam Lockhart, who is an educator, artist and musician, had made up an incredible soundscape that accompanied the exhibition, and he used actual field recordings. He used pieces of me reading some of the poetry, and he put that together with some incredible music in a soundscape that he did specially for this exhibition. And the exhibition itself, it runs until March the 10th, so it'd be good if you got down to see that.